The hum of polite laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses filled the air as I stepped into the private dining room. Crystal chandeliers bathed the space in a golden glow, and every table was adorned with extravagant floral arrangements. Soft pink roses and delicate baby's breath spilling over the edges of gold-trimmed vases. It was exactly the kind of event my mother, Victoria, would orchestrate. I adjusted the hem of my deep emerald dress, classic and understated, nothing like the flashy designer gowns that swished around me. As I moved forward, conversations faltered, heads turned, and the whispers began. "That's Amelia, right? The bartender. God, imagine choosing to work in a pub when her sister is married to a millionaire. I heard she barely gets by. I mean, look at her, she doesn't even own a Chanel bag." I ignored them, keeping my posture tall as I searched for my seat. But as I scanned the carefully curated tables, an uncomfortable realization crept in. There wasn't one. "Ah, Amelia, you actually showed up," came a syrupy voice from my right. I turned to see my mother, Victoria, standing with a flute of champagne in hand, her pearls gleaming under the soft light. She didn't greet me with warmth, just thinly veiled irritation. "Of course I did," I replied, offering a small smile. "Madison invited me." Her lips pursed. "Well, how nice of you to take a day off from." What was it again? Pouring drinks. A few women beside her snickered behind manicured hands. Before I could answer, Madison's voice rang out. "Amelia, you made it." My sister, glowing in a blush pink designer dress, waddled towards me, her perfectly highlighted hair falling in soft waves. The very picture of a beloved socialite. "Of course," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "Wouldn't miss it." She giggled, resting a hand on her round belly. "Well, I almost didn't assign you a seat since I wasn't sure if you'd be able to take off work. But don't worry, I'm sure someone will scoot over." I felt the sting of her words like a slap. They weren't even trying to be subtle. My fingers curled around the small gift bag in my hands, a personalized hand-painted baby journal I'd commissioned from an artisan. I had spent weeks ensuring it was perfect. "How thoughtful," Victoria mused, her voice dripping with condescension. "Though I hope it's not homemade." Laughter. The kind that cuts sharp and cruel. I refused to flinch. "No, mother. But of course, I wouldn't expect you to know the difference between handmade and cheap." A flicker of something crossed her face, irritation perhaps, but she quickly masked it with a tight smile. I turned to Madison. "Congratulations, Maddie. You deserve all of this." Her eyes narrowed slightly at the nickname. She hated it when I called her that in front of her elite circle, but I smiled sweetly. Victoria took a sip of her champagne, dismissing me with a glance. "Well, enjoy yourself, dear. If you can find a place to sit, that is." I felt the heat of humiliation rise to my cheeks, but I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Let them laugh. Let them whisper. Because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was the truth. The truth about me. And soon enough they would find out. I left the baby shower without saying goodbye. There was no need, no one would miss me. The moment the heavy oak doors of the restaurant closed behind me, I let out a slow breath, releasing the suffocating weight of their judgment. The night air was crisp, the city humming with life beyond the walls of my mother's carefully curated world. I slid into the back seat of the waiting car, my driver, Daniel, nodding politely as he pulled into traffic. "Home, Miss Carter?" he asked, knowing full well that home wasn't my tiny apartment above the pub my family assumed I worked at. "No, Daniel. The restaurant," I murmured. He nodded, changing course, and I watched the city blur past the window, my mind still replaying the scene at the baby shower. Their laughter. My mother's veiled insults. Madison's smug dismissal. Let them believe I was nothing. Let them whisper about how I wasted my life. Because the truth? The truth was something they could never comprehend. I was Amelia Carter, yes. The family disappointment, the pub bartender. But I was also Mia Laurent, owner and head chef of Elon, the most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant in the city. My name was whispered among the culinary elite, my reservation list stacked with months-long waiting lists, my dishes raved about in food columns that my mother probably skimmed past on her way to the society pages. And they had no idea. As Daniel pulled up to the discreet entrance of the restaurant, my second-in-command, Luca, was already waiting outside, his arms crossed, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. Rough night? He asked, exhaling a swirl of smoke into the cool air. I let out a breathless laugh. You could say that. You look like you need a drink. He smirked, pushing open the door for me. God no, I groaned, stepping inside. I've been surrounded by champagne-soaked socialites for hours. The moment I entered the kitchen, the weight of my family's contempt melted away, replaced by something far stronger: purpose. This was where I belonged. Here I wasn't the disappointment. Here I was unstoppable. The scent of simmering stock, fresh herbs, and truffle oil filled the air. The rhythmic clatter of knives against cutting boards, a symphony of precision and talent. My team, my family in every way that mattered, was already preparing for the next service. Luca fell into step beside me as I pulled my hair into a tight bun. You got the message? He asked, his voice low. I nodded. The Michelin inspector was coming. This wasn't just another critic, another influencer hoping for a free meal. This was everything. A second star would solidify Elon's place among the culinary greats. It would silence every doubt, every whisper that I had been nothing more than a lucky gamble. And as I surveyed my kitchen, my empire, I knew with absolute certainty. My family didn't know me, but soon enough the world would. Victoria Carter prided herself on being an early riser. Mornings were for espresso, silk robes, and leisurely flipping through the latest issues of Society and Style and Gourmet and Vine. It was part of her ritual, starting the day knowing exactly who was worth knowing. This morning was no different. She settled into her sunlit breakfast nook, the scent of fresh croissants wafting from the kitchen as she turned the pages of Gourmet and Vine, her manicured fingers skimming past lesser chefs and their predictable farm-to-table trends. And then she saw it. A full-page spread. A headline in bold, elegant script. Behind the curtain. The secret genius of Mia Laurent. Victoria's brow lifted slightly. The name was familiar. She'd heard it whispered at events, mentioned with reverence by food critics, even gushed over by some of her wealthier friends who had somehow managed to secure a reservation at Elon. Mia Laurent. The mysterious, elusive chef whose identity had remained largely unknown. Until now. She adjusted her reading glasses and continued. After years of speculation, the face behind Elon, the city's most sought-after Michelin-starred restaurant, has finally been revealed. The enigmatic chef Mia Laurent is none other than Amelia Carter. Yes, that Amelia Carter, whose family name is well known in socialite circles, though rarely in culinary ones. Carter, long assumed to be a mere bartender, has built an empire under a different name, deliberately keeping her success hidden from her own family and the public eye. With whispers of a second Michelin star on the horizon, the question remains, why the secrecy? Victoria's breath caught in her throat. It had to be a mistake. A misprint. Some other Amelia Carter, surely. She stared at the accompanying photo. Her daughter. Dressed in her crisp chef's whites, her hair pulled back, looking straight into the camera with a quiet confidence Victoria had never seen before. She barely registered the porcelain cup slipping from her grasp until it shattered against the marble floor. Mother. Madison's voice floated in from the hallway, footsteps clicking across the tiles. What was that noise? Victoria couldn't speak. She could only lift the magazine with a trembling hand. Madison took it, her gaze flitting lazily over the page, until it stopped. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face. That's not, she started, but the words died on her lips. It was Amelia. Amelia, who they had laughed at. Amelia, who had been treated like an embarrassment. Amelia, who had been forced to search for a seat at her own sister's baby shower. The pub worker was a world-renowned chef. A chef who had deliberately hidden her identity from them. Madison's mouth opened, then closed, her throat bobbing as if she had swallowed something bitter. She thought of the sneering way she dismissed her sister that day, the way their mother had waved off Amelia's little hobby. God. The women at the shower had whispered about Amelia, mocking her. But how many of them had dined at Elon, gushing over a meal without ever realizing who had crafted it? The realization hit her like a freight train. They hadn't rejected Amelia. Amelia had rejected them. Victoria finally found her voice, but it was a mere whisper. She kept it from us. Madison's grip on the magazine tightened. No, Mother, she said quietly, swallowing the lump in her throat. We just never bothered to see her. A week had passed since the article. I knew it had happened. I felt it in the way my phone buzzed endlessly, in the sudden flood of social media tags, and in the uptick of desperate reservation requests disguised as casual inquiries. But most of all, I knew because my mother and Madison had finally decided I existed. They hadn't called, of course. That would require humility. Instead, they tried to go through Elon's reservation system, thinking their last name would open doors that had been locked to them for years. It hadn't. She's trying to book under Madison Carter again, Luca smirked, leaning against the counter in my office. Persistent. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Did she actually think that would work? You tell me. It looks like Mommy Dearest tried too. The hostess shut that down real quick. I exhaled through my nose. Part of me had expected this, but seeing their names on the system scrambling for a way in, it felt so hollow. For years I had been the outsider in my own family. An afterthought. An embarrassment. Now suddenly I was interesting. I knew why they wanted in. It wasn't to reconnect with me. It wasn't to apologize. They just wanted to be seen at my table, to be able to say, yes, our Amelia is very successful. Of course, we've always supported her. No, they didn't get to rewrite history. I stepped onto the restaurant floor just as the last seating of the night was underway. The low hum of conversation, the scent of saffron and seared butter in the air. This was my domain. Then I saw her. Madison. Standing at the entrance, wrapped in an expensive coat, her posture tense. She had no reservation. And just like every other person who came to Elon thinking their name alone was enough, she was being turned away. I watched as the hostess, bless her, she was good, kept her tone even. I'm sorry, Miss Carter, but we don't accommodate walk-ins. All reservations are by invitation or recommendation only. Madison shifted, frustration flashing across her face. I understand that, but I'm Amelia's sister. The hostess smiled politely. Yes, I know. Madison hesitated. So, she didn't leave instructions for me? No, ma'am. I had. The instructions were simple. Treat them like everyone else. Madison's gaze flickered across the restaurant, searching until it landed on me. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I simply held her gaze, letting the weight of the moment sink in. For the first time in our lives, she was the one on the outside. I turned to Luca, my voice steady. Escort her out. He nodded, walking toward the entrance. I could see it the moment Madison realized that she wasn't welcome here. Not because she wasn't family, but because she had never acted like one. And now she was just another name on the wait list. I knew they wouldn't stop. People like my mother and Madison never heard no, not really. They had spent their lives assuming that if they pushed hard enough, insisted long enough, the world would bend to accommodate them. But I wasn't bending. So instead of answering their calls, I sent a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A real letter, written by hand, sealed and delivered by courier. Just like the invitations to Elon's most exclusive events. I imagined Madison opening it in her pristine white kitchen, her manicured fingers pausing over the wax seal, my mother pursing her lips before unfolding the crisp parchment. And I imagined their confusion turning to disbelief as they read my words. Mother. Madison. I am not ignoring you. But I am also not interested in empty apologies given only because I am now someone you can boast about. For years you saw me as a disappointment. The pub worker. The girl who didn't belong at her own sister's baby shower. And now because a magazine tells you I am important, you wish to be part of my life. But real value isn't found in status or appearances. It's found in work. In dedication. In respect. So if you truly want to understand me, if you truly wish to reconnect, then you must understand my world. Not as guests. As workers. You want a table at Elon? Then earn it. The same way I did. You will start from the bottom. No special treatment. No favors. The kitchen doors are open to you. The question is, do you have the humility to walk through them? Amelia. I imagined Madison's face twisting in outrage, my mother gasping in disbelief, both of them too proud to consider it, at least at first. And yet I also knew this. They had no other choice. They had spent a lifetime caring more about reputation than relationships. And now the only way to reclaim the daughter and sister they had abandoned was to step into the very world they once belittled. For the first time in their lives, if they wanted a seat at the table, they would have to earn it. If I expected them to back out, I was wrong. Pride made them hesitate, but the fear of being permanently shut out won in the end. A week after I sent the letter, they showed up. Not as guests. Not as family. As workers. Madison arrived first, stepping hesitantly into the back entrance of Elon, where deliveries came in and kitchen staff took their smoke breaks. She looked out of place in sneakers and a plain black shirt, her usual elegance dulled by the harsh fluorescent lights. Luca smirked when he saw her. "You sure about this, princess?" She stiffened but nodded. "I am." "Then put this on." He tossed her a stiff white apron and a hairnet. She caught them awkwardly, her fingers clutching at the fabric like it might burn her. Victoria arrived later, her usual pristine confidence frayed at the edges. When the maitre d' handed her a crisp black uniform for the dining room staff, her mouth opened, maybe to protest, maybe to remind everyone who she was, but she closed it again. She knew, for the first time in her life, who she was meant nothing here. First they struggled. Madison fumbled with knives, nicking her fingers as she tried to chop onions. Her hands, once used to holding champagne flutes and designer handbags, became red and raw from washing dishes. Victoria, who had spent a lifetime commanding staff, now was the staff. She stumbled under the weight of heavy trays, flinched when impatient guests snapped at her, and learned the humiliation of being invisible, the way she had once made people like me feel. They wanted to quit. I could see it in their faces. But they didn't, because quitting meant losing me forever. And so they endured. And slowly something changed. Madison, once too delicate to lift a grocery bag, found strength in her arms. She stopped flinching at the heat of the stove, stopped wincing at the pressure. She learned the rhythm of the kitchen, the unspoken language of chefs in motion. And my mother, Victoria Carter, queen of perfection, began to listen. She softened her voice when speaking to customers, began noticing the small details that made service exceptional. I caught her one evening adjusting the placement of a napkin, smoothing it down with care. Not for appearance. For respect. For the experience. For the guests. And then one night it happened. Madison had spent months peeling, chopping, stirring, cleaning. Never cooking. Never tasting. Until I placed a single plate in front of her. One dish. I didn't tell her what it was. I just watched as she hesitated, then took a bite. She froze. Her breath hitched. I saw it the moment she understood. The flavors, the technique, the care woven into every ingredient. It wasn't just food. It was me. She set her fork down, her hands trembling. "Amelia." Her voice cracked. Tears spilled over her cheeks. For the first time she tasted not just a meal, but everything she had overlooked for years. The love. The sacrifice. The devotion. And she wept. A year passed. Victoria no longer turned her nose up at waitstaff. She greeted them with warmth, learned their names, respected their work. Madison no longer scoffed at hard labor. She found joy in the precision of a perfect sauce, in the artistry of plating, in the pride of serving something made with her own hands. They didn't just learn about food. They learned about life. About me. And maybe finally about themselves. A year ago, I never would have believed this MO. A year ago, Madison and my mother would have never set foot in a kitchen unless it was to critique the plating of their overpriced meals. They wouldn't have lifted a finger in service, wouldn't have looked twice at the people who worked behind the scenes to create the loo. A year ago they didn't see. Not really. But things were different now. Which was why, for the first time in over a decade, I was setting a table just for us. The small private dining room at Elon was quiet. I plated the final dish myself. A delicate spread of soft, buttery scrambled eggs, freshly baked croissants, citrus-cured salmon, and a drizzle of saffron-infused honey over warm brioche toast. Simple. Comforting. A meal meant to be shared. The door creaked open and I turned. Victoria and Madison stood in the doorway, hesitant, uncertain. It was the first time I had seen them outside their uniforms in months. Gone were the stiff postures and perfectly curated personas. Madison's hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, no longer styled to impress but simply to be. My mother's usual sharp expression had softened, not with exhaustion, but with something more unfamiliar on her face. Humility. "Come in," I said. They stepped forward cautiously, their eyes scanning the table, the food, me. Madison let out a shaky breath. Are you sure? I gestured to the seats. Sit. They did. For a long moment we didn't speak. We just sat together in the quiet, the scent of fresh coffee lingering between us. Then my mother picked up her fork. She took a bite, slowly, thoughtfully. When she looked up, her eyes were glassy. It's perfect. I smiled, a real one this time. I know. Madison exhaled a laugh, soft, self-deprecating. Of course it is. The silence that followed wasn't the cold, awkward kind we used to share. It was something else entirely. Something whole. I cleared my throat. You've changed. Victoria nodded, swallowing hard. So have you. We weren't the same people we had been a year ago. I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the family disappointment. And they weren't just socialites clinging to status. For the first time in my life, I saw them as people, flawed, struggling, trying. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were still wounds, still years of unspoken resentment and hurt beneath the surface. But this was the beginning. A real one. Together, we lifted our glasses in a quiet toast. To change. To understanding. To family. And as we shared that first bite, I knew we would never go back to the way things were. We could only move forward.